Hi there, it's Rita, and this week I would like to introduce you to a very special guest. Glenn is the People and Culture Lead at the Australian Energy Market Operator and one of my very, very dear clients. So I couldn't wait to have a conversation with Glenn and really bring some of his insights to you. By way of introduction, Glenn has over 25 years of experience in people and culture leadership roles, particularly across the corporate sector. So he's worked across Australia, the US, and really in different organisations too, such as Queensland Investment Corporation and QBE. He also spent some time at NAB and also at PwC. So Glenn holds an MBA and is passionate about inclusion, high performance, and enabling talented people to thrive. And that really comes through in our conversation. At AEMO, he champions a range of programs to support AEMO to have the culture, leadership, and capability that it needs to manage this big, big time in energy. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Glenn. A very warm welcome to you, Glenn Jackson, this morning. Thank you so much for being on the Deliberate podcast with me today.
Good morning, Rita. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, me too. We've known each other obviously for a little while, Glenn. We've been, partnering and doing some things within your great organisation, AEMO. For those of you, for those that do not know, the Australian Energy Market Operator, and we can get into that in due course. Glenn, but it's such a privilege to have you on the podcast. I've seen you address different teams of leaders across AEMO, and I see the compassion and care that you bring to the conversations from a leadership perspective, and I know that our broader audience will also benefit from that. So thank you again.
Oh, very nice of you.
So I know, Glenn, that people have already heard the introduction, so they've heard a little bit about you in terms of bio, but tell us, Glenn, why are you in a leadership role? What lights you up about leadership?
That's a great question. I think for me, I love being able to help stimulate potential and to stimulate a culture and a workplace where terrific people can really just thrive in their professional lives, support as we can in their outside of work lives as well. And for me, I've seen in action the power of great inclusive teams combining to solve really difficult issues and doing it in a way that has real impact. So for me, the privilege of being able to contribute to that is certainly what gets me energized, excited, and certainly motivated.
Yeah, great. I think certainly that there's what you're saying in there's that bringing people together for the greater good certainly comes through. Glenn, the role that you're in right now, would you mind letting people know a little bit about your role, but also is it what 20 years ago, is it what you thought you would be doing?
Well, I might start with that
part
of the question actually. 20 years ago, time goes very, very quickly. 20 years ago, I had the privilege of moving into probably my first significant leadership role in 2005 with the National Australia Bank. And I was delighted to go into that role. I certainly didn't feel ready, but I felt totally supported. And the leaders that I had supporting me, mentoring me, cajoling me, pushing me, I'm forever thankful for. And I think once I really got into my groove around how a great team could perform and how I could work with, great colleagues as a sort of HR professional. From there, I was able to continue to build opportunities, be given opportunities, and that has culminated in some terrific roles into really great organisations. But if I reflect back, and I'm really thankful for the nudge that I was given. Probably started 25 years ago, actually, and with leaders who really believed in me, had my back, but also gave me the autonomy and the and the openings to really see if I could make that impact. And so as we sit here today in 2025, I'm an incredibly proud member of AEMO. We're a really purpose-driven organisation, and that is to shepherd through the energy transition. And it is something that is a really important role for society. And what I find is that our colleagues are they're passionate about helping to solve for problems that we need to stare into over the next few years as the transition really continues with momentum. So the role that I have now, I lead the People and Culture division, a member of the executive team, and both of those in combination are where I spend my time. So with the executive team, we are there as a team. We are all contributing to the strategic direction of the organisation, the performance, the culture. And I happen to be the custodian of the People and Culture division. One of the things that I love about what we do is our team is really trusted and called upon to help leaders at all levels and teams come together to be effective, to make sure that we've got really clear purpose, that we're collaborating really well, we're connecting really well. And, that's a very special place to be, and I certainly don't take it for granted, but that's built on the excellence of the team.
You mentioned purpose there a couple of times, Glenn, and I think, it's a foundational piece, because if we can't really connect in with the purpose of the organisation that we're with, the team that we're a part of, it can leave it looking like a piece of Swiss cheese, as I often use in terms of an analogy, a little bit holy. In terms of purpose for you, how important is it as a driver when you are connecting with a team or an organisation?
Yeah, it has become incredibly important to me. From the moment I walked in the door of AEMO, I really felt this want for the organisation to have a really positive impact on society. And the power of that is immense. And I think, all organisations have the opportunity to be really purposeful and to define what that is. And I think for me, that's been my learning as I've gone through. What is that really noble purpose that you're seeking? And, whether it be the custodian of financial security for others, whether it be the custodian of the energy transition or a customer experience, you can all seek a purpose.
I think, there might be some people listening in that might be struggling, particularly with that noble purpose. It doesn't always stand out in organisations, not because they're not noble, but I think in sectors like yours, for example, where you know that you are working on something that there is absolutely a platform for it to be occurring right now in terms of energy and that discussion in our community about it, but also it's future proofing for years down the track. For me, in health and education, it's very clear. What's your advice for people that are part of an organisation where that purpose is not as clear, it's not as obvious? What's your advice around what can you do to connect in with that purpose, particularly as a leader?
Yeah, I think it's really create the space for the conversation to happen and thrive. I think the encouraging team members to really articulate in their words what they think the purpose is, and then allow it to sort of bubble up, aggregate up. And one of the things that we did was we engaged really deeply and through crowdsourcing and many other aspects of engagement to create a new set of values for us that we launched 2.5 years ago. And that didn't come out of a boardroom. That came out of the voice of a vast majority of the organisation. And our job was to synthesize it and see if we could, package it in a way that would absolutely respect all of the passion and the contribution that had come from others. So the advice that I'd give is create the space and allow it to flourish, and then seek to synthesize.
Yeah, and I love that, because often we do we engage in these kinds of activities the other way around, which is we have a very senior group that's locked themselves away for a day or two, which is always useful. But when you're only doing that level of exploration, creation, and then you're kind of pushing it down as opposed to inviting others to be a part of it, it just does not have the same feel.
No, and one of the things that it still puts the goosebumps on my arms is when we're getting to the tail end of that process, many of the team members that contributed to it told the story of the values through their lens, and it was incredibly diverse, but also really connected and super powerful and inspirational, and we still use that to this very day.
Yeah, yeah, and that, I mean, the approach, Glenn, because I've watched it from afar in terms of your consolidation into what I would call now three really rich values that that AEMO now live by is extraordinary, and you can see that it's easy for people to live by it, to live and breathe it, because there's a simplicity but also a deep elegance around how they've been created and how you've been able to bring people together to do that.
And it's not easy to do it, and the other advice I'd give is don't try and rush this process, because it will take time for it to all start to gel together. And I remember when we were in the sort of synthesis phase, we had great contribution from our communication professional colleagues who really knew how to create that simplicity that you spoke to, and make sure that it is something that people can resonate with quickly and live it, most importantly.
Yeah, that's right. So in terms of time frame, Glenn, if there's a leader that's listening thinking, oh, we do need to review our values, or we need to establish new ones and new behaviours, what's your advice around how long reasonably and realistically should people give themselves for that kind of embarking on that kind of exercise?
Yeah, experience tells me that it's somewhere between about 3 and 6 months.
Yeah.
The first phase is all about the exploration and getting the inspiration through voices. And then it's a case of, okay, let's make sense of that. Let's try and synthesize it. Okay, now we want to create some spirit around it in terms of color, in terms of how it's represented, and then the associated markers are really important. So, in our meeting rooms and indeed in our boardrooms, big sign of our values is they're very prominent. So whether it be for our employees or for visiting guests, very, very prominent.
Yeah, you absolutely get that tone walking through your offices without a doubt. Glenn, what you've described there, one of my favourite words, and you'll likely know this, is deliberate. I love things to be very deliberate and very purpose-led and very intentional. And I think the process that you've described there around that creation of the values is certainly that. It's certainly deliberate. I want to take our conversation now into, deliberate leader characteristics that you've observed. At some point, we've got some deliberate leader attributes that we've identified as part of our work and our research. And at some point, there'll be a deeper dive into those attributes and characteristics, and we're going to see what else, is flushed out. According, though, to your experience, Glenn, and what you've seen, but also what you practice, if you had to pick, some capabilities or behaviours that you would describe as being necessary for deliberate leadership, what would they be?
My whole starting proposition is around trust and care. And I'm a big believer, and it's been interesting as I've seen my journey play through how the whole approach to the people and culture profession has changed for the better. We would have punitive policies that probably 1% of that were built for 1% of the organisation, rather than really progressive, embracing policies that are for 99% of the organisation. So the first one is I always start with trust, that if we set the right culture, we set goals very intentionally, and we set ways of working very intentionally, then allowing people to have the sense of empowerment, the sense of autonomy, and the sense of comfort to speak up they, for me, are the real aspects of trust. What I've experienced is we have a true geographic coverage across this great country that we're all a part of, or for those that live in Australia anyway, might have some international guests. Trust is critical because one of the really strong aspects of how we work together is we team across geographic divides. And to do that, you need trust in each other, you need trust in your leaders, and you need trust in the way that you've set your systems up to be, to your point, deliberate. So that's the first bit, trust. And the second bit is care, ensuring, none of us are immune to the curveballs that life will throw. And everyone knowing that we've got your back in the tough times. And how can we support? How can we make sure that from a caring perspective, the humanistic side of the organisation is very alive? It's not robotic. It's something that you can feel, and it's something that when the time is required for colleagues, that we do have that caring approach. We do have that approach to being really present with whatever issues people might be dealing with. And it could be something from diffusing a disagreement within a team all the way through to, more significant personal issues that people go through. So trust and care is the thing that I really carry deeply.
Glenn, I want to come back to trust. On care, do you think that we are more caring as leaders these days versus kind of a decade or two ago?
Yeah, I really do, actually. And, I had the privilege of, being an HR leader through the pandemic, and where the rule books weren't there. And indeed, if there were rule books, they were thrown out pretty quick smart. And I did see a real change in this humanistic style of leadership, even for the most technical of leaders who had been, and I've worked with technical leaders all through my career. And what I've learned is that investing deeply in them as leaders, but also setting the tone of what we really encourage our leaders to be exhibiting in terms of their behaviours is critical. I have seen that change, and I see it continue to change before my eyes. And I was in a conversation with some peers from other organisations just recently, and we were talking about the power of the safety that an organisation can bring to people, a sense of belonging, a sense of being cared for, and how that is becoming more and more prominent. So, I think about that a lot. It's I think it's going to materialise more and more, and organisations being a safe space for people. We have a magnificently cultural richness in AEMO, and having a harmonious and a really respectful and celebratory theme on cultural richness creates a sense of harmony, and I think that is it's invaluable today, and I think it will continue to be invaluable going forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think certainly the pandemic has forever changed our ways of working, and we're still seeing it. And I'm not just talking about that, the virtual in-person thing, the hybrid thing, but I think we got to see more of each other because we're in each home offices. We're seeing people's pets and kids and extended family. We're seeing different aspects of people's personality that we wouldn't have otherwise seen. So I absolutely agree. I think that was a turning point. It also makes me think, though, about this whole belonging and safety that you mentioned, and almost creating communities within workplaces. So it's not, I don't think I would be unique in saying that I could pop out onto my street where I live and not really see many people. You might see cars go by, but in terms of people walking or connecting in, with neighbours often, we're just not doing it. I remember as a kid so vividly, playing tennis and cricket out on the street with my brother, and we would just watch. We weren't on a busy road, but we would, these are the 𝗪𝗏 𝗓𝗏 and 𝗟𝗲𝗿h days when we both had the appropriately themed tennis racket. I had the pink 𝗬𝗵𝗂 𝗃 tennis racket, and we'd go out on the street, but it would mean that all these kids would gravitate towards us, and particularly around Australian Open time here in Australia in January, you'd get like just swarms of kids, and everyone kind of having a go. So that sense of community was really prominent. I don't think it's there as much now. Do you think that our workplaces have really taken over in terms of the role of creating community when there's perhaps a lack of community, in our local neighbourhoods and in the communities we live?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I had a question the other day about we have town halls that our CEO hosts, I think every couple of months, terrific conversations. And one of the questions that I got was around volunteering leave and how could that be used. And the specific was, I'd like to attend a school excursion with my son. And I said, brilliant. That is exactly what we want us to be contributing back into our communities, whether it be schools, community organisations, sporting clubs, etc. And really, organisations can really embrace and encourage that. And one of the things that I've also learned is many, many years ago, there were so many rules around, okay, you could volunteer for this, but not for this or this or this. Now it's, hey, we trust. If you're going to volunteer for something that's important to you, go for it. And I hope you really, really find it meaningful. So I agree with you. And one of the things, Rita, that organisations can do really well is create communities. And the work that we've done in partnership together, which is all around accelerated, really talented, emerging colleagues. When I enter into the rooms, I see community. I see new relationships formed. I see trust being built. I see real care for colleagues who have come from all different parts of the organisation. And we need to really nurture that. I like to use the term connect for purpose and impact. And that's what those things really create. And so you can create communities outside of sort of divisional structures through initiatives like that, through leadership forums, through forums like our Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Committee, which is all volunteer, passionate people that come together to really define what they would love us to be diving deep into in terms of inclusion. So community, really important. Organisations have a big role to create both within the four walls, but also to encourage colleagues to contribute to community, as per things that are important to them.
Yeah, it has either physically or virtually, it is our go-to space. So it absolutely makes sense that organisations really look into how they can play that role of curating and fostering a sense of community, because it's there. We're not finding it necessarily out on the street or in our local communities. The other thing you mentioned there, Glenn, was trust. And trust, for many of us, it's a key value or a key principle that we might live by, that we look for. And I, after so many years of research into trust, it still is an area which is nebulous. And the reason why I believe is nebulous, but I'd love to hear your views on this. We know when we have trust. So we know when trust is established. It's almost a feeling, but it's intangible, and we don't know necessarily when it occurs. I think it builds over a period of time, but it can be lost really, really quickly. In your experience, what are the hallmarks of trust for you in a leadership sense? So in a relationship with your people, with your colleagues, with peers, what do you look for to give you that sense of, we've got trust here?
Yeah, it's a great question. And reflecting on that, when you move into a new leadership position, whether it be within the organisation or outside, whether you like it or not, people are watching you. Who is this person? Who is turning up? Can I trust them? Am I going to be able to put my commitment, my full effort into this particular person? So the first thing that I would say is you've got to be really present in how you show up. First moments absolutely matter. And I say to our colleagues all the time, the moments that you create with others really matter, and be very purposeful that you're creating, the impression and the impact that you seek to. So the first thing that I'd say is really being very present in yourself. The second is being very, very curious and very engaging with the individual. Not, oh, what role do you do? How are you? How's things in your world? What's going on in your world? What are the things that really light your fires inside of work, outside of work? And being curious, but also being very, very respectful of people's boundaries as well. So being curious shows an intent of really wanting to know the individual as a human, not just as an employee. That's the second bit. And the third bit that builds trust is consistency. So I've seen it time and time again where, particularly much earlier in my career, there was a fear of how the leader was going to show up. What's the mood going to be today? Is it going to be one of great contribution, happiness, etc., or is it going to be one of fear? Hey, I'm not going anywhere near that person today. So again, for leaders, making sure that each of us are going to get off on the wrong side of the bed at some point, but being able to catch yourself and being able to take a big centering moment so that you're showing up consistently. What that creates is an openness to engage. It means that people aren't squirreling away issues that should be brought to attention so that they can be resolved. It is people feeling that they can bring contribution, they can bring ideas and wisdom, etc. So the other three things for me, first impressions absolutely count. Being really curious, being very curious about others. And third is absolute consistency. And leaders need to catch ourselves if we're a little bit off kilter and get it back nice and centered.
With permission, Glenn, I think we could, or you may have coined there, the 3 C's of trust. So I'm hearing connection. So those first moments that matter, curiosity and consistency.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think about a lot in terms of how we work and develop our leaders. The trust equation is a really important one that we take the time to unpack. We've got some of the most amazing engineers in our organisation who like formulas. So we give them a great formula, and that's the trust equation. And that resonates well.
It's an oldie but a goodie, and I think it does because I think it reduces the cloudiness for some people around trust. As I said, we all know what it is, but to really be able to understand, how do I build it? How do I measure it? How do I get a sense of, whether this trust is two-way between us? I think the trust equation is a really good one. And you might have coined your own new one there, which might, you could pip it up against David Meister's any day.
I would say, though, high-performing teams need to continue to tender to trust. Every time a new team member joins, the team dynamic changes. So making sure you have the opportunity to sit back and connect back in with the team in terms of who we are, our ways of working, knowing each other, really, really important. And one of the other things that I've learned is it's not a set and forget. You've got to continually tender to the effectiveness of the team. I like to use the term, create white space, so that you can really enable conversation to go where it needs to go. One of the pitfalls that teams can fall into, in my experience, is having agendas so finely tuned and having too much in them that you don't create the white space that enables for relationships, creativity, etc. And that's one of the things that we're still working on, and making sure, we've all got busy portfolios, but making sure that as an executive team, we create white space. We do that okay. It's certainly something we've got to make sure that we create the time to do.
Yeah, as you say that, Glenn, it makes me think of, the mode of going from doing to being. So whilst you're still doing, but as you're creating that white space, there's more of a sense of, I'm coming in, I can be. I've got that flexibility to be responsive and adaptive to wherever the conversation may need to go for us as a leadership team, or for a team if we're discussing something within our teams. As a leader, you know, one of the things I hear most frequently from the leaders that I work with is they've got a lack of time. They're so busy. They're busy with personal commitments. They're busy with work commitments. And, you know, even the mention of reflective space, or the term I like to use is ARIA, so creating time and space for awareness, reflection, insights, and action. I think it's really hard and it's a bit elusive for some people. How do you create that white space for yourself, you know, to do that kind of deep thinking that is required, you know, particularly in your role at this executive leadership level?
You've got to be really deliberate and disciplined. And I deliberately have chunks of time planned out in, you know, we sort of plan where I spend my time, you know, a month ahead, 2 months ahead, etc. Agile around it for sure. But knowing that I need time and space to connect with others, particularly connect with the team, be there in the moments that matter, and to connect with my executive team colleagues. Being very deliberate around that and doing all that you can to protect that space. So being disciplined around it. I love to read and reflect on things that are really pertinent to the role that I play in the organisation that I'm a part of. And so I'm quite deliberate around creating space as well. And I remember really vividly something that I heard a few years ago when Andrew Mackenzie was the CEO of BHP. And he said, as the CEO, he has to deliberately create more white space than not in order to do his job effectively. And that really resonated with me. It's hard to do, but be deliberate and be disciplined if you can, to not allow that to dissipate fully. It's going to change for sure, and things come up, etc. But being deliberate around that is very important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because I think as leaders, I find that, as you know, in the earlier parts of your career, we measure our value based on productivity and achievements, and then as we become more senior, we realise that it's less about our personal achievements, more about the teams and the role that we play. So it's almost like the value proposition of what you offer changes. And I think, I mean, I don't know what you think about this, but I think a lot of us miss that. It's not obvious, and we still continue to measure our worth and value in leadership in terms of what we were doing when maybe we were the technical expert or we were the team leader of technical experts, versus as we move towards, you know, operational middle level leadership, but then strategic and executive leadership, that I reckon the value proposition changes. And if we're not really recalibrating what it is that we're offering and the white space required, as you say, Glenn, to allow us to do that thinking, I reckon we're doing ourselves a disservice.
Yeah, and look, I'm not saying it's easy, but there's two things that I certainly reflect on in leadership style. The first is around the it's not a concept actually, it's a mantra of servant leadership. Of really, it's not about you, it's about, you know, those that you work with and the impact that you can create for those. So, you know, it's about creating opportunities for those that are in your team to really own excellent outcomes and pieces of work, and for them to get the opportunity to share that and get the recognition for it. The other one is the sense of stewardship. And, you know, none of us are going to be in roles forever. And that sense of how do I ensure that it's not about me, it's about what we've created together that will long surpass you sitting in the chair. So, yeah, I think about that a lot, about if you've got terrific people around you, and I'm blessed with an amazing team, allowing them to really step into the full aspect of their contribution and role. And one of the things I always catch myself is don't overreach, make sure that you create the space for others to do it really well. And the second piece is really think about this stewardship concept and the, don't want to use the word legacy, but the platform that you would be able to hand on to another person at the right time who will bring fresh ideas, fresh thinking, etc., and to be really embracing of that.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there, absolutely. And that automatically, when we do have that right team in place and we've got that trust, we can happily, and I guess with a bit more even oomph in our step, kind of hand things over to them and know that they've got it. But as you said, I mean, earlier on, one of the things that you said was moving into your more senior roles, you still had that sense of, not sure that I'm ready, but I'm supported. And it's really about that support that we can provide to our people as they're taking things on and moving the agenda in organisations.
Yeah, and I'm just so thankful. The more I reflect on it, I'm just so thankful for those leaders who really created that environment for me. And it was based on trust. It was based on empowerment. It was definitely based on stretch as well, making sure that it was, it was going to challenge and help you grow. And I'm forever thankful. And as I think about, the role that I have now and the privilege of it, how do I give that back? How do I have a mindset of, I want to create that for others because they're brilliant and they've got careers that will shoot the lights out.
Yeah. And it's easy to connect in with that when you've experienced it yourself, that role modeling. Glenn, often for leaders, when we talk about deliberate leadership, there's something very assured about deliberate leadership, that you can visualize the path, you can set the strategy, you can mobilize a team around it, motivate and engage them to achieve the strategy. And I think the other side of that is that we don't have to stop being deliberate, but there are things that can come along the way that create tension or frustration and create a sense of needing to adapt, which kind of is a little contradictory to the term deliberate, or it can be. What's your view and what advice do you give for leaders that, whilst they may set out to be very deliberate in their strategy, but when something kind of this curveball that you mentioned before comes along or something happens and this need for flexibility, how can they maintain this sense of being very deliberate whilst dealing with ambiguity and maybe a scenario that might require them to be adaptable?
Well, the first thing is don't ignore it. Don't ignore the little niggles that you're starting to sense. No organisation is infallible and, you're going to have niggles all over the place. Ensuring that you're not walking past them and that you're encouraging people to lean in, to seek to understand and listen to start, and then to seek to solve. And so, again, that is adaptive leadership in all of its forms. And what we work on, particularly with our senior leader cohort, is, are you creating the connections across the organisation that only this group here can really help to solve for those niggles? And let's make sure that we are constructively identifying them, working through, ensuring that there's no isolism coming in. Actually, we're all here to solve for the good. So you can be deliberate around that. It is a technique. And we, continue to ask ourselves, where are we spending our time? And are we deliberate in where we're spending our time? And in the senior leader cohort, we want more time connecting with colleagues, working on the enterprise issues that only this team can really help shape and solve for. So that's a deliberate strategy, but it requires different techniques. And, one of the easiest things that we can do is walk past those things at the outset, and before you know it, they've bubbled into something that could have been prevented.
Yeah, those niggles, they're there for a reason. Hey, it's like the sign that comes in, and you can choose to ignore it, but it usually doesn't go away. And I think it also, for me, it connects back into that care that you talked about earlier on. It does, even if the niggle is, let's say it's no biggie, it's easily resolved, but it's still is a demonstration of care when you're just connecting and just checking that, is it a big deal? Is it not? How can we
Yeah.
make this easier for you? I think there's an opportunity there to demonstrate that care and compassion.
Yeah, we had an instance just recently where a team's working on something incredibly important. It's high stakes, high emotions, etc. And you see these little niggles come in, and the first thing that we can do is be in there listening and acknowledging, and just allowing that expression to not be pushed down. Allow it to push out so that we can then realign against our values, realign against what we've got to deliver. And the team feels then that they've got my back. They know that this is hard, but we're going to get through it.
Yeah. Glenn, for you, because often it's the toughest experiences and those that, we would rather not have gone through that create the best leadership lessons. Have you got one that comes to mind for you, that a time when you were tested and maybe your team was tested, your organization was tested, but in hindsight, you reflect back and think, I'm so grateful that happened because that enabled me to be more deliberate in my leadership. Have you got something that you could share with people around that?
Yeah, for sure. Organizations are always evolving, and you've got to evolve to ensure that you're able to deliver on that purpose that we spoke about earlier. I've had two really prominent instances that I remember where we've had to big chunks of a workforce were moved in. They were not part of the strategic direction going forward, and so they were either transitioning into new organisations or transitioning out. And the lesson that I continue to reflect on is the courage of really being upfront and very deliberate and purposeful right at the outset. It's easy to have these things being worked on behind the scenes, and then the deal is fully formed and it's sprung on people. There was a particular instance where we had a big chunk of a workforce that would be transitioning out. We were able to do it over about a 12-month period to ensure that people felt that they could express their views and enable that to come out and listen and acknowledge and respect that to start with. But secondly, then we could have strategies of strategies of, okay, where would you like to work next? What are the things that you'd like to do next? And people were able to move through that, at a pace where they didn't feel overwhelmed or pressured. And so when I reflect on, roles that I play and others in like roles, you will need to be leading sometimes really tough aspects of how the organisation needs to pivot going forward. Stare into it, be really compassionate in doing it, but also know that with good planning and good engagement, even the tough things can be moderated a little.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of heart that comes into that too. And often, the leadership challenges that are the hardest are the ones that have us internally conflicting between head and heart.
Absolutely.
The hardest ones.
Yeah. But again, my learning and my share for that is be just super clear on the why, super clear on the support and the care that you can give people that are going through transitions like this, and do it in a way, again, that is very deliberate, that is not rushed if you can. And yeah, my experience is if you can plan these things out, you give yourself the chance of really supporting people as best you can through them.
Yeah. And final question, I think, Glenn, might be final, depending on if any others come out from this question. But, deliberate leaders can have a very clear intention for how they want to lead and how they want to be and how they want their teams to be. And sometimes there's a disconnect between, maybe having a deliberate leader, but not so much a deliberate team. So if you're, what would your advice be if you're speaking to a leader who's very, very clear from a vision perspective on what they want to achieve, but they've got to kind of be bringing their team along, perhaps more so than what they would like, but but they know that there's potential in that team. How does that deliberate leader turn their team into a very deliberate team?
Firstly, you've got to really demonstrate the investment in that space for that team to be present together. And in today's world, where a lot of the stuff is done over Teams or Zoom, whatever, nothing beats human connection and nothing beats time spent really getting to know the person. So relationship first, task second. And you've really got to invest in that relationship and creating the space for that to thrive. And, you know, we've got a very deliberate approach around team effectiveness that we work with all of our teams around. And it is really creating that space for them to be, to connect together physically, you know, across the geographical divide. It might only happen 2 or 3 times a year, but every time that happens, you're not starting at 8:30 and finishing at 5:30 with an agenda that is so finely tuned that you have no time for the humanistic aspects of team. And that is just so important. And again, how can we influence space and time and reflection? Tasks can be done like this, right? And but team connectedness, you have to invest to create it to happen. And I remember that very vividly. The CEO of NAB, John Stewart, said very deliberately, you have to invest in collaboration because don't think it'll happen naturally. And as a leader, really create that investment.
Yeah, it's such a good point, because we can connect on I don't know, let's say we're producing something, a project that we're working on together, but that collaboration, if it's only short-lived or if it's only for the extent of that project, I don't think it helps us build a strong foundation for a relationship going forward. Even though we move on to different projects, no doubt paths will cross again. So I think, what you're saying there around relationship first and task second. The task will always get done. It's the easy bit. I reckon the hard bit is figuring out people's working styles, what motivates them, what keeps them kind of lit up in relation to the theme or the subject that you're working on. I think it's a really good point, and one that I'm sure leaders will appreciate.
And you can really sense culture when you've created that space. And we had our senior leadership cohort together a couple of weeks ago, about 50 or 60 people. And just listening to the vibe gives you a sense of how the team's going. So seeing the relationships, seeing the noise, seeing the connections, the hardest thing that I had, which was not, and I was very happy, was getting people back, because they were engaging, they were building that rapport and relationships, and you got to allow that to flourish and indeed let it run if you can, and change things around in agendas or whatever, if you can really feel that vibe heading in the right direction. And if you feel that it's quiet and it's, it's not energetic, you got to create that. So how do you do that? There's lots of tools and techniques that great people bring that really create that energy, but you can sense it.
Yeah, and it brings us back to that theme, that central theme we've discussed today, which is that belonging. So when you do like when people are having a great time and you can see it and you can feel it, because you don't really have, you could walk into a room and not have the visual, but sense it almost. You're so right. That is when you know that you've got that great culture that is continuing to evolve and shape as the organisation does, but it's creating an environment where people want to be there and they want to belong.
Yeah, and it gets back to that accountability that people like me carry of investing to create the space for that collaboration. And again, being very purposeful and deliberate around that.
Yeah, and Glenn, you've certainly done that at AEMO. And I've only known you since your time at AEMO, but you can feel it when you walk into your organisation. And so congratulations to you and the team on having curated that kind of culture there too. Glenn, thank you so much for our chat today. I've loved it. I've taken away a whole heap of notes, which I'm sure others have. And even if they're walking, and hopefully they'll go home and get a notepad and just jot a few things down, because there was a lot in there around that trust and care that you talked about. That sense of you're the custodian, but not the owner. I really love that you're sharing that with your executive team around people and culture. and also how to develop more of that, kind of deliberate mindset for teams. So thank you, Glenn, so much for being on the Deliberate Leader podcast today.
Oh, thanks, Rita. I've really enjoyed it, and terrific to connect.
Likewise. Hello, I really hope that you enjoyed that episode of the Deliberate Leader podcast with Glenn Jackson. Glenn shared so much, particularly around trust and care and bringing in a more humanistic element into how we lead. And I don't think that can be underestimated, particularly post-pandemic and really leading the way that we are now, which is quite different to a decade or two ago. Glenn really brought through the elements of, high performance, accountability, trust and care, this humanistic approach to leadership. And he really talks in depth about his role as custodian of people and culture in his organisation, but that he's not doing it on his own. He's doing that with his executive team. So AEMO, from my own experience, are a great organisation here in Australia. I think there's a lot that we can learn from this conversation with Glenn in particular. So I hope you enjoy it.